Have you ever heard anybody say everyone should have a podcast? I've heard that. In fact, I may have even said it myself. And while I like the idea that everyone can have a podcast, or nearly everybody can for sure, there are some questions that you should ask yourself before you start planning and spending. And I'm not talking about the question, do you like the sound of your own voice? What's happening, podcasters? This is 1000 Podcasters, and I'm Brian Ensminger. I'm a podcaster and a podcast editor, and I'm here to help you succeed with your podcast. You can find me at toptieraudio.com, where I help podcasters through consulting, editing, and the free content that I create, like this podcast. Today, I want to talk with you about some of the questions you might ask yourself before you start your podcast. And I want to let you know that my goal here isn't to make anything harder or to discourage you or anything like that. Rather, I really want to help you get some additional clarity before you start. You might have heard people say things like, make sure that you know what success looks like, or make sure that you like the sound of your own voice. And spoiler, most of us podcasters actually don't. Or be comfortable speaking into a mic. And for many of us, that's not a possibility because we don't start comfortable with a mic. So those questions are not bad questions, but there are some really, I think, more fundamental questions to ask yourself about yourself. And to kind of illustrate this, I'm going to share a little bit about my story, and then I'm going to share some of these questions. I started my podcast, The Engaging Missions Show, about 5 years ago. I knew that I wanted to highlight missionaries and some of the things that they were doing, and to create connections and to serve the missionaries and serve the people that were interested in the show. And that also expanded then to include church planters and ministry leaders. I had some background in audio, so I was relatively comfortable with that. And I also had a guide, another podcaster, to help me through the process of planning and launching my show. So I had some of that stuff in place. But even as we were going through that process through his video course, he had some questions to ask myself about my ideal listener or my avatar and some things like that. But there were some questions that he didn't ask me. And these are the same questions that I often don't see others address either. Facebook groups, all kinds of stuff. I'll see questions come up. And these are the questions that I don't see people addressing when somebody says, should I start a podcast? Now, I probably would have still answered all of these questions yes. And even as you're going through these, if a no to these questions comes up, that doesn't mean you shouldn't start a show. It's just something that you want to learn about yourself before you start, because it'll be helpful in terms of identifying areas where you might want to grow or might want to build a team around yourself or some things like that. When I started my show, even though everybody told me it wasn't going to happen, I pretty much thought everything was going to be puppies and unicorns. And because I was following a person who helped me launch my show, that things would be great. And it was hard work. There was a lot of work to do. I wasn't surprised by that, but I was surprised a little bit by how much work there was. I did get some listeners early on, but it did not at all exceed my wildest dreams. And in fact, a few weeks in, I had what I'll call a come to Jesus meeting with myself. That's a meeting where I sat down and really had a hard conversation with myself about the show. And I wanted to understand whether I should keep going, because it was a lot of work and I wasn't seeing the results that I wanted to see. But the most important thing was I didn't understand the amount of personal growth that was going to be required. I didn't understand how incompetent I would feel most of the time, especially as I launched my show. But even now, sometimes as a podcast host, I still feel a little bit incompetent, because there's always that opportunity to grow. There's always something that could go better. And I want you to be able to know these things about yourself before you start, because I see them coming up time and time again as reasons that people quit a podcast, or reasons that things that they wish they would have known before they started. So here are the uncommon questions to ask yourself about yourself. Do you have a burning desire to serve people that you may never meet? Because the reality is, most of your podcast listeners are likely not going to interact with you. There are some exceptions, but most of your podcast listeners are going to listen and go on with their lives. You might be having a huge impact in their life, but you may never know it. Question number 2, do you care so much about something that you talk or ask about it all the time? Is there a topic that you just can't stop talking about? Number 3, are you willing to keep going even if it seems like you're making a difference? That kind of goes back to number 1. Are you willing to persevere? Do you have within you what it takes to keep going even when it seems like things aren't working out? Now, this doesn't mean that you have to keep going forever and ever because you made a commitment, and even though things aren't working out and your life is falling apart, that you can't stop your show. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, are you willing to make a commitment to keep going even when you don't seem to be seeing results? because results take time. Are you committed? Number 4, are you committed to ongoing learning and growth? Are you willing to learn? Are you willing to grow? When you find yourself incapable of something, are you willing to invest in yourself to do that, to learn how to do that, or to become that person? Or are you willing to invest in somebody else to have them help you? Number 5, can you deal with and maybe sometimes even seek out public criticism? That's one of the challenges with having a podcast or being a public figure in any way. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a huge public figure, because I'm not, but when you're a public figure and when people have access to the things that you've said outside of a relationship with you, because they're not sitting in the room with you, it's very possible for there to be very public criticism. And while it's not comfortable, you're going to have to deal with that kind of thing. And then the last one, are you willing to learn or delegate what you don't already know how to do? Because there is a lot that goes into making a podcast. Beyond these emotional things that we've talked about, these things about yourself, are you willing to learn? Because you're going to have to learn how to research and prep yourself. You're going to have to learn how to prep your guests if you have interview guests. You're going to have to learn marketing and graphics and recording and editing and publishing. You're going to have a website. You're going to have to learn how to engage your audience. These are all things that you're going to have to learn. And trust me when I say that 5 years into this, I am still learning these things. Many of these things I'm not very good at, and I'm still getting better, or I'm investing in people to help me with this. You're going to have to be willing to do that kind of thing too. You're going to have setbacks. You're going to have to answer some of these questions with a yes. Now, answering no to these questions doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't start a show, but you need to know, because you'll have a better understanding of yourself, and you'll be able to better understand whether you should go forward. And I'm just going to go ahead and throw this in there as maybe a potential, this could be a deal breaker. If you don't have a desire to serve people, a podcast might not be the right thing for you. Now, I don't mean that you have to serve them by giving them things. If you make people laugh and it makes you happy to know that you're making people laugh and that is serving people, that's okay. But you have to be willing to understand that it's going to have to be about your audience and your ability to serve them. Now, as you ask yourself these answers, you might not like all the answers. You may not be comfortable with all the answers, or you might decide that you do like the answers. You may decide not to go forward, or you might decide to go forward. These are not a guarantee of success, but they're something that you want to consider, because if you'll ask these questions of yourself, you'll understand yourself better. You'll be better prepared for some of the less known parts, especially the less known challenges of podcasting, and you'll be able to launch with more confidence. You'll know where to focus your attention when you're growing as a person or finding support or resources so that you can get better. You won't be as surprised when these things come up and you have to learn a new skill or you have to learn how to deal with something new, and you'll be more likely to keep going when things get tough. In short, you won't be taken by surprise by these things. Now, if you already have a podcast, I'm interested in your perspective as well, because I don't suppose that I got everything. So I'm wondering, what did I miss? What other things should people be asking themselves before they start a podcast? Leave that in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And if you don't already have a podcast and you would like some help launching your show, I can do that. Visit toptieraudio.com to set up a consultation, and we'll get you started right away. That, incidentally, is also the place that you'll go if you want to subscribe, or if you want to connect with me or set up a consultation, or perhaps have me edit your show. Toptieraudio.com is the place for all of that. Thanks again. Now go out there and make a great podcast.